Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to cover two topics. The first one is we're going to take a look at a growing problem that we've been dealing with in Armenia, which is non-combat deaths in the military, and we'll discuss that in detail. Then we're going to move on to the news that Russian soldiers are going to be withdrawn from the border post between Armenia and Iran, which is one of the things that came out of the CIS summit that was held recently in Russia. And CIS stands for the Commonwealth of Independent States, which is the body that was created to replace the Soviet Union on paper. On the issue of non-combat deaths in the military, which is a significant problem, and it started to get a lot of attention recently, I would say very much deservedly so. It's something that is an ongoing problem. It's actually been going on for decades, but we're paying very special attention to it right now, especially since the war ended in 2020. And we have some figures about the numbers of the deaths that we're talking about. This year, which is 2024, which obviously has not ended yet, we already had 15 non-combat deaths. In 2023, we had 35 non-combat deaths. In 2022, we had 16 non-combat deaths. And in the year 2021, we had 20 non-combat deaths. The causes of these deaths vary from multitude of reasons. One of the primary ones being essentially 18, 19-year-olds driving heavy equipment in hillsides and high mountaintops, which is quite problematic. In many cases, you have negligence by commanders and fellow soldiers. And worst of all is when you have incidents of sort of systematic bullying, either by commanders or by other soldiers, which has actually led to multiple suicides. The most recent death that we had was actually a suicide that was as a result of bullying, and since then actually two people, the commander and one of the other soldiers, has been arrested for their negligence and their criminal activities. As a result of this, we at CivilNet, we actually sent a series of questions to the press office of the Ministry of Defense to sort of outline specific areas that we wanted answers on, which is actually, it's not us that we want to answer, it's actually Armenian society that is demanding these answers. So I'm going to read to you the questions that we had. The first one was, tell us the names of the servicemen who died in non-combat conditions this year. The second one was, what are the reasons for such a large number of deaths in non-combat conditions? The third one is, the two most recent deaths recorded among demobilized servicemen who died on their way home by taxi. Why does the military not transport military personnel back home? They pick you up from a base and they take you to your location. The least they can do is to return you to your place. Number four is, has the number of deaths, the non-combat deaths in the Armenian Armed Forces, how do they compare to the same number of deaths in with other militaries, as far as when we're talking about proportionally? And lastly, and most importantly, what is being done in practice to reduce the number of non-combat deaths? The response that we got from the MOD, to say the least, was unsatisfactory. They essentially gave us a lot of vague generalities and really didn't answer any of our specific questions. And for the most part, what they hid behind was the fact that there are ongoing investigations and we're looking into things and things of that nature. So they actually didn't really respond to our inquiry. In analyzing this, I think the first thing that we need to note is non-combat deaths in an army are unavoidable. This is the nature of the work and the business, because it's actually dangerous work even in peace times. So there's no military, even the best run military in the world, have non-combat deaths and injuries. That's not the issue. The issue is the number of these incidents compared to the size of our military, which is clearly out of line for where it should be. And many have called for the establishment of a military ombudsman's office that's actually outside of the command structure, that can actually go in and independently investigate and essentially become an advocate for military personnel, most of whom are actually draftees and not professional soldiers. And this is something that I support strongly, because institutions are such that they're really not capable of investigating themselves, especially when you're investigating powerful people or commanders. If you want to understand what underlies this problem, frankly, is two things. It's a lack of discipline. And you cannot have a proper army without having discipline that is consistent and across the board. And what bothers people is actually a lack of transparency. There's a lack of trust with the Ministry of Defense because of these incidents, because they never clearly come out with the reasons for these incidents and actually what steps that they have actually taken to correct it or to punish people responsible where there are guilty parties. What is needed is far more prompt and transparent investigations and the capacity and the political will to actually punish commanders who are responsible for these incidents. And part of this count that we have is actually understated, because what we don't have is a number of people that are actually heavily injured but have not been killed, which is a good thing. But there's obviously, for every incident, for every truck that rolls over, if 2 people are killed, there's only 5 people that are injured. So we don't have specific standard procedures of actually having counts for that. What we are lacking here is a lack of responsibility culture, which is something that we've seen, in other militaries around the world. There have been defense ministers that actually have resigned or have been forced out of office on things that are far more minor matter than this, and not something that's actually led to almost 100 deaths over the last 4 years. Now on to our second topic of the week, which is the announcement that came out of the CIS meetings in Russia. The first one, most important one, being the removal of Russian troops from the border between the border checkpoint between Armenia and Iran. There's essentially one of them in Zurich. What this agreement will mean, which is actually an agreement between both sides, that by January 1st, Russian soldiers or border officers will actually leave the border post, essentially, that connects Armenia to Iran. And from that point on, that position will be entirely held by Armenian Border Service. This was a result of a direct agreement between Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and President Putin during their talks as on the sideline of the CIS summit. The announcement that was made by the Prime Minister's office read the following. At the checkpoint on the Armenia-Iran state border, the services will be carried out entirely by the Border Guard troops of Armenia's National Security Service. In analyzing this, what we're actually seeing, this is simply another minor step in the de-Russification of Armenia's security structure. It's important to note that they're actually leaving the border post, but they're not actually leaving the border positions between Armenia and Iran, just the border posts with people that cross back and forth for trade and tourism purposes. The practical likely reason behind this is because after the Russians were asked to leave Zvartnots airport and other airports in Armenia, they do not control the borders at the airport, which is the main entree point. By controlling the Iranian border entree point, they would actually have access to the computer systems that would allow them to know who's entering the country and who's leaving the country, and what is entering the country and what is exiting the country, which is something that they used to be able to control via their control at the airport. So this was a backdoor for them to actually get that information. So this is likely the reason that this change was made. What this likely indicates is that the summit actually, or the talks in the CIS on the sidelines between Armenia and Russia, did not go well. We're assuming that this has actually led to, specific quite a level of unhappiness on the side of the Russian state. And we actually got a glimpse of this, but a very interesting statement that was released right after the announcement was made that the Russians will be leaving this border post. And this is what was released. Every year, we choose the cultural capital of the Commonwealth of the CIS, which will become the center of bright, creative humanitarian events that attract and keen interest of citizens from all countries. Next year's baton will be taken over by Azerbaijan's Lachi. What can we say about this outside of the depravity and the pettiness of it on a human level? It's frankly an idiotic move from a public relations perspective, both for Russia and the regime in Baku, to the extent that having Lachin or Berdzor, as Armenians call it, to be the cultural capital of the CIS gets any attention. It'll actually bring attention to the exact area and the exact location in which the single greatest crime in the history of the CIS has ever taken place, which was the ethnic cleansing and the genocide of Artsakh last year. And essentially they're bringing attention to their own depravity and criminality. On a final note on this matter, the place declared the cultural capital of the CIS by the Russian state, in effect the cultural capital of Azerbaijan in this case, is Lachin, or Berdzor as Armenians call it, is a place that has actually was populated by Armenians from 1992 to 2022. And prior to that, in the Soviet period, it was actually populated by Kurds. It's Kurdish populations that lived there and not Azeris, or very few Azeris if there at all. In short, according to the designation, the only place in Azerbaijan that has any culture or cultural value, vote noting, is a place that almost no Azeris have ever lived in. So on behalf of the Armenian people, I want to thank President Putin for his recognition of the contributions of the Berdzor Armenians to the development of culture in the Commonwealth of Independent States. Sir, you have never made a more truthful declaration. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Insights.
Do you get a little kick out of being slow-minded? You want to be like your father, it's approval you're after, but that's not how you find it. Do you